Tennessee is losing 60,000 acres of agricultural land per year. That's like losing one of our large state parks every year.
The major project that you guys have been working on over the last few years is the Cumberland Trail.
The Cumberland Trail, about 300 miles, and it's the first linear state park in our existence.
Wow.
I've been to Iceland, I've been to Ireland, I've been to Jerusalem, Israel, Caribbean, Japan. I can keep going, and it's one of my favorite places on the entire planet. One of our main banks downtown, they were building this bank. The guys go down there 30 feet down, and there's a full saber-toothed skull and a bunch of bones from a saber-toothed cat. They're like, oh, that's cool. We can name a hockey team after it.
I've heard some experts say like there's this cave underneath Nashville that's like 6 times the size of Bridgestone Arena.
It's unreal.
And no one talks about it.
Right. We know so little of what's underground that it'll blow your mind.
Hello and welcome to the XPLR.NASH Podcast. We are glad that you are taking the time to listen or watch this show. This episode is brought to you by Go Explore. This is a custom-tailored loyalty platform that we have built for your business to use. If you're interested in learning more, go to goexplore.io. Joining me today is Jon D of TennGreen. You're a naturalist. You love Tennessee. So what exactly is TennGreen, and what does it mean to be a naturalist?
Sure. It's a heavy question, but it's a good one. TennGreen Land Conservancy is our full name, TennGreen. So Tenn is in the first part of our state, is a land conservancy. And what we do is our mission is to conserve land where people and nature can thrive. And that boils down to a bunch of very interesting things that we do, from conservation easements for private landowners. So whether you've got 600 or 60 acres of a farm or agricultural land that you want to keep as agricultural land, you don't want it to be developed. Conservation easement is a legal binding document that says, hey, you've got a land steward, which would be TennGreen, and then you've got a legal document upheld by the state and the government that says this has to stay this type of land, whether that's forest, wetland, you're running cattle on it, anything like that. So as long as there's a government, the type of work that we do is upheld in perpetuity. And another side of that is what we call acquisitions, where we'll go in and things at the state level can move pretty slow, and funding is very tight.
Of course.
So you have organizations like ours that step in and say, hey, we can buy this land, do fundraising, hold on to it until we'll acquire it, which is why it's called an acquisition. And then we'll sell it or give it to the state, whatever the circumstances are, to expand a park. So that could be like Fall Creek Falls. I know you guys have done a lot of shoots out there. It's gorgeous. We helped make that park a reality.
So Fall Creek Falls, for a great example, if people don't know that's listening to us, it's the largest waterfall, single drop waterfall east of the Mississippi River, 256 feet. Gorgeous waterfall, but there's also other waterfalls around it. If memory serves me correctly, that park is over 29,000 acres. It may have grown since I've last looked at it.
Yeah.
So
it's one that's grown quite a bit.
And it may be over 30,000 acres now, which is still a very large state park, but it's definitely not the largest. The one off of Interstate 40 towards Jackson, that one is massive, 200,000 acres, big park. So we'll get into the parks here in a second, but Fall Creek Falls. So, you guys have helped acquire the land surrounding the park. So what, how long has the organization been in existence? And then walk me through the story of helping get that land around Fall Creek Falls.
Yeah, well, that was before my time, so I don't know how much I can offer on the specifics of that, but it's all part of TennGreen's full story, which we're 25 years old. So TennGreen Land Conservancy is the oldest statewide, which means we work from Memphis to Knoxville, everywhere in between, oldest statewide accredited land conservancy in Tennessee. So we've been doing this.
And you're accredited by the state.
The Land Trust Alliance and other bodies that make sure that we're using money exactly how we say. Because I'm not, the reason that I'm a communications guy and not a development guy in this world is I don't enjoy asking people for money. I don't really like talking about money. I don't like some of the emotions that brings up, but it's very important, and it's really reassuring to see how many people are willing to put their money into making sure Tennessee stays beautiful. But yeah, on that front, the accreditation says we're doing exactly what we say we're doing, whether that's with money, staff, anything else, grants, all that stuff. And everything we do is transparent. So if you're ever curious about anything that for those of you watching at home, if you're ever curious about anything that Stuart and I talk about, you can look it all up on the website. Everything's completely transparent. And that was the biggest thing that drew me to working with TennGreen as a naturalist and a communications guy, is none of it feels dirty, because none of it's dirty. Everything that we're doing is to help this state and the people and the wildlife, agriculture, old growth forests, savanna grasslands, our waterways, everything. I mean, literally the work that I do every day, my back is killing me and I'm worn out, but I love it because it really is all for the greater good, for a lack of a less.
So with the major project that you guys have been working on over the last few years is this concept called the Cumberland Trail. And this is going to be 230 miles once it's complete, something like that, from basically South Tennessee, where like the Alabama line is, give or take, up to basically Kentucky. And it's this massive trail system that you guys have been trying to acquire land and build this thing out. So what's that experience has been? That's a massive amount of territory.
Oh, yeah.
You have some beautiful state parks like Justin P. Wilson State Park in that territory. You have Black Mountain. These areas of Tennessee that are like stunning that a lot of people don't know actually exist in our state. So what is the Cumberland Trail? What's your ETA? I know that that's it may take you the next 100 years to acquire all of that land, but like parts of the Cumberland Trail have been completed. But like walk through this massive thing that you guys are building in Tennessee.
Yeah, man, this is why I love working with you. I mean, you know your stuff. It's cool. You're going to take my job.
I'm not going after your job. I'm going after other people's jobs. So
good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
you heard it here first. The Cumberland Trail, about 300 miles, hopefully, when it's done. But border to border, exactly like you said. So it's a Tennessee state park, and it's the first linear state park in our existence.
Wow.
And it looks weird on a map when you look at the trail that's supposed to be finished, because it does just stop at state lines. And we know, nothing else in nature does that. But the trail will, just because it's going to be a Tennessee state park. So you can kind of think of it as the Appalachian Trail, but just our little Tennessee version here at home.
Okay.
And the acquisitions for that and the work that's been done for it is really incredible. It's going to take a while. My gut says another 30 years.
Okay. But
this is something that Governor Bill Lee and his administration and all of our partners really care about, and we're really working towards. It runs the area of Tennessee that we call the Cumberland Plateau, that you're very familiar with. That's where all of our gorgeous waterfalls and caves and karst formations and everything else are.
So
and it's an incredible place in between Nashville and Knoxville. Runs straight through that kind of division between Middle Tennessee and East Tennessee.
Yeah, it's honestly probably one of the most beautiful areas
in
the
planet,
South. Yeah, on the planet. That's what I was going to ask you. Like,
I've been to Iceland. I've been to Ireland. I've been to Jerusalem, Israel, Caribbean, Japan. I can keep going, and it's one of my favorite places on the entire planet. So to have the Cumberland Trail go all the way through there and introduce so many people from our state and just from anywhere, anybody who wants to come here, to those incredible waterfalls, the caves, the scenic views, and to have it all protected so it can't be developed, is really, really cool. And development is fine and it's good. We have to have it to survive. It's not all development is bad. So when I use that word, I'm not knocking all development. But like we were talking about Fall Creek Falls earlier, that one and Cummins Falls and several others, when they were up for sale privately,
it was all commercial guys coming in and going to build resorts and these,
everything from apartment buildings to resorts to subdivision with, look, you can have this view of a waterfall.
Yep.
And it would have
been Niagara Falls of the South.
It would have been, it would have been bad, not just for the scenic views, but for the water quality.
Yep.
I don't think people realize how much of us in Tennessee still depend on natural water sources.
Well, and if you look at it from a consumption level, we have some of the purest water in the United States.
Yeah, very much so, especially out west.
Because of the limestone.
Yeah. And the Memphis Sand Aquifer for West Tennessee, we're doing a lot of work out there with Wolf River Conservancy and a bunch of other people to make sure that water that they're drinking stays clean.
Yep.
And really, it's for the future, because the water that Memphians and everybody else in West Tennessee and all the bordering states, for that matter, are drinking is 2,000 years old.
Well, and we have to look at our crops and our agriculture. Like West Tennessee is the predominant area in the United States for farming, one of them. And so like we need good water for our soil and for our plants.
Yeah. And we were talking about those stats earlier. And it's so important to put this in perspective that Tennessee is losing 60,000 acres of agricultural land per year. And that's a tremendous amount. 60,000 acres. You know, we were just talking about the largest state parks. Yep. That's like losing one of our large state parks every year. Yep. And it's the type of work that's done to that land when we say lose, puts it in a position whether there's a battery plant being built on it like there is out west right now, or it's turned into a subdivision. It takes thousands of years to restore it back to what it was. So, you know, that's a huge loss for our agriculture, which we're already making it too hard for our agriculturists and our farmers and our ranchers to survive in this state.
Is that based on regulations, or is that based on supply chain? Is that based on just everything in general? Everything in general. Cost of living, cost of supplies, cost of feed, cost of hay. Climate change is a whole nother topic, but when you're looking at how hay grows and how crops grow and everything else, everything is changing at such a significant rate that it's very hard to continue a system of agriculture that's existed for 2,000 years in a world that is tremendously different than how that agricultural practice started. I am not an expert on that field, but it is something that I'm passionate about. What are your thoughts? Have you seen the concepts out of Japan and in New York where they have skyscrapers that are 30, 40 stories and they're growing different types of crops in each floor? What are your thoughts on that? I love that. I think one of the things that we just did, the Land Trust Alliance just hosted their first Tennessee Land Conservation Summit last week, and a bunch of us from TennGreen were there, and I gave a speech, and it was great. And a bunch of the Governor Lee's, really his inner circle was there. And these people really care about conservation, which is going across party lines, which I love. And that was one of the things that they were talking about was, I think in order to make people care and in order to make a large, sizable difference in our state, we do have to start bringing wild spaces into our urban spaces. Yep, exactly like that. I like what, there's a really good case study. I think it's Singapore, and how they've incorporated into their buildings these massive park spaces. And Singapore is a different demographic than we can ever understand because there's like 45 million people that live there. Right. But okay, so what are your you finish that story of what you're saying with the governor's team? To me, it all boils down to one of my biggest, and this is kind of a hiccup for some people, it is what it is, but for me, nature and humanity are not separate. We're one and the same. And that's not a theological statement. It's not a political statement. It's not anything other than just how I feel from being a naturalist and a part of nature is we are an animal. We are a species. We're a part of this planet. We require nature to survive. Therefore, we are part of nature. So to have this viewpoint, especially in America, because we're such a new place where people had to come in and colonize and pull things apart to make something new. We have this mindset that, okay, there's nature and then there's people. So you have your wild spaces and then you have your urban spaces. But in a lot of other places on the planet, that's not the case. And I think it's perfectly feasible for us to have urban spaces that are still wild, that still have plants growing. We can build a skyscraper and a road, but we can have native wildflowers lining those roads. Like in Texas, they do this to a great effect. So the pollinators still have a place to, be pollinating wildflowers, go over to our crops, and then therefore we still have food to eat that isn't coming out of a laboratory. Or putting panels of greenery on the side of buildings that are absorbing so many of the things that we're putting out into the ecosystem drops the temperature by like 10 degrees in a city, which we really need right now because, I don't have to tell you how damn hot it gets in Nashville in the summer now because we're baking so much pavement now. Or baking the pavement and the reflection of the sun on the glass and how that raises the temperature 10 to 15 degrees in the city. Right. Like in New York, when you go to New York and it's 80 degrees, it feels like 120. It's awful. Yeah. And then you also don't have any breezes coming through most of that space because you've got skyscrapers, and it's not how our planet was built to function. And we have spent a long time trying to bend our planet to function how we want it to. And I think we're seeing the results with the LA wildfires and a whole bunch of other things that are really tricky to get into.
And the wildfires that we're having here in Tennessee, like the 2016 Smokies fires and things that we don't really associate with daily life.
Yeah. Well, there was that fire in Chattanooga recently too.
Right. And we're seeing,
but that wasn't any wildfire, but yeah.
Right. And we're seeing nature just kind of remind us, you're not in charge. You are part of this system, and we really need to figure out a way to get back to a place where it's normal and it's not a political statement to acknowledge that. I think would be really, really cool. And that's one of the biggest things that I try and focus on is let's talk about our accomplishments. Let's talk about the things that we're doing right. Let's talk about ways that we can do better, and let's give people hope, because as soon as you start taking that hope away, you're dead in the water. I mean, if we make everyone feel like they're never going to be in control, like there's nothing you can do, it's already too late. To me, we've already lost the battle. Yeah. So that's a big part of the naturalist work, which I know you wanted to talk about earlier, but I got off on a tangent.
No, it's okay. It's good. So you were trained at the Nashville Zoo.
Yes.
And then what like type of certifications do you have to be a naturalist?
That's a great question. So for me,
because I could say I'm a naturalist because I like nature, right? But I'm not. I'm not trained.
And that's the definition of someone who is a naturalist, is someone who engages and communicates natural history. Okay. So by that definition, anyone can be a naturalist. But if you went to work somewhere, like for a land conservancy or for the state with TDOT or TDEC or anything else, and wanted to call yourself a naturalist, you wouldn't be able to do that without accreditation.
Of course.
Like our state naturalist, Roger McCoy, who's a friend, wonderful man. He was just named our third or fourth state naturalist. We're trying to figure out whether it was 3 or 4. Okay. There's a little bit of a technicality there, but the work that he's been doing as a biologist and a botanist with the state spans.
Was he from UT?
So that's the thing. Roger, you can talk about Roger with so many different bodies in Tennessee because he's done so much incredible work. Okay. So for me, I started at the Nashville Zoo right out of college and did over 200 hours of behavioral husbandry training. So I'm an animal guy. I'm a wildlife guy. That's why I still work with cattle and stuff at my home. And I have a small ranch where I do animal husbandry there, because I trained in wildlife tech work with Walden's Puddle, which is our wonderful wildlife rehabilitation center accredited here in Middle Tennessee. Harmony is another one that TennGreen, we actually made that whole place possible through a conservation easement. They were going to lose it, and we said, no, let's make this a conservation easement. You guys can continue to do the incredible work you're doing. So I run wildlife rescues with them. So my whole background is wildlife. And so when I say I'm a naturalist, that's what I'm talking about, is my accreditation through the Nashville Zoo and everything else. I'm also doing the Southern Appalachian Naturalist Certification Program.
That's awesome.
And that's with the Tremont Institute and Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So I grew up right outside the park and love everything about that area of the world. So it's really, really cool to be working with experts there. And to me, it's just like I'm already a naturalist. I already do this professionally. But being a naturalist isn't about knowing everything. It's about learning everything. Yep. So I will always be taking classes. I will always be seeking new accreditations, new pieces of paper that I can get from, the SANCP that's a piece of paper from UT Knoxville that I don't have. That's pretty enticing to me. It's, for me, all of these experiences are learning from people who know a whole lot more than I do. And the more of that I can do, the better, in my opinion.
So let's talk about the 3 grand divisions in the state of Tennessee. If people don't know our Tennessee state flag, the 3 stars represent the grand divisions in our state. I have it tattooed on my arm. You have East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee. In East Tennessee, we have the gorgeous mountains, great waterways. Middle Tennessee, we have the beautiful rolling hills, incredible waterways. West Tennessee, incredible waterways and flatlands. So let's talk about the 3 grand divisions. Like, what makes Tennessee so beautiful? Why should people come and visit our state and spend their money here compared to other states?
Ooh, that's such a great question. This is a difficult one for me because the more I've worked in the state, I was born and raised here, born in Nashville, grew up in the mountains, came back for college at MTSU, and have been working professionally in Nashville ever since.
And what was your degree in MTSU?
I did speech and communications. Okay. So that's why communication is such a big part of naturalist work and all that fun stuff. it really feels like once you really start to get to know Tennessee, there's 4. There's Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville.
The big cities. Yeah.
Right. And because even everything down around Chattanooga is so different in Middle Tennessee than everything that we know in Nashville, Clarksville.
Oh, it's like with Chattanooga, the thing I think of immediately of Chattanooga is the outdoor experiences. The kayaking, the caving, all of that.
Yeah. If you are an outdoorsman, that's your place.
Yeah. Chattanooga is like one of the best destinations in the country for that.
Agreed.
And they also have the highest speed fiber in the United States.
Yeah.
Just saying, if you need a tech company, Chattanooga is a great option for it.
Right.
You should move to Chattanooga.
But for real, though, yeah, you feel like you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere, and then you get there and you're like, wow, okay.
And it's surrounded by great food. Great, So let's talk about like why should people come to Tennessee and spend their money, especially with outdoor attractions. And that we have.
Speaking about it from those 3 great divisions, it's out in West Tennessee. I grew up so much in Middle and East Tennessee that I'm really exploring a lot of that place for the first time with TennGreen, which has been really cool. The wetlands that we have out there are exceptional. Yeah. I've done a lot of videography out there and shown it to people, and they're like, where is this? And I'm like, well, this is 3 hours that way in Tennessee. I mean, bald cypress trees growing up out of wetlands that are
is one of the lakes
and they're 2,000 years old.
Yep.
The bald eagles that you'll see out there, the alligators that we have coming up.
We'll talk about that here in a second.
Which I think is cool. That's one of my favorite things. You're a good man, Stuart. Let's talk about alligators.
We're going to talk about alligators and bears. and I have another question for you about another wildlife here.
Let me some megafauna. Let's do it. But everything out there in West Tennessee, we tend to think of like what we were talking about earlier, agricultural land and flatlands. But so much of the Mississippi River has shaped that part of the country. Yeah. And we have a lot of that in the state of Tennessee, and the wetlands in particular. I cannot recommend enough people coming here and going to the state parks.
Just the wetlands near the Tennessee River are stunning too.
Also really beautiful. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that even just thinking about it in that juxtaposition of how much land there is in between the Mississippi River and the Tennessee River that runs through over there. I mean, that's a tremendous part. And that's the coolest thing about Tennessee is how different it is and why we call it the 3 great states of Tennessee, because we're such a horizontal state that, unlike Georgia and a bunch of other places where things kind of stay the same until you get down to the coast, we're running horizontally and we've got such different pockets moving from, for an example, from West Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, we have the most caves in the world
that we know of. Yeah.
Here in Middle Tennessee at large. But if you look at a map, 90% of them are in Middle Tennessee, and it's through that Cumberland Plateau and the karst formations and the limestone and the rock and everything that are incredible waterways that we were also talking about. Get under that rock, carve things out, and make these caves that would blow your freaking mind.
So most people don't know this, but the last I checked, the state of Tennessee has 10,000 registered caves. There's way more than that. There's caves that we have no idea about. But there's a cave towards Fall Creek Falls you may have been or you may have heard of it called the Rumble Room. It's basically 2 sizes of Bridgestone Arena, and you drop down this descent that's like hundreds of feet. We've known actually a cave expert that's been there, and he's done the drop from our rappel line, and then he's also done the hike out, which is a 14-hour hike out of this cave. But look up the Rumble Room on Google. It is remarkable, and that's 2 hours from Nashville.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't realize is Nashville is actually on top of an entire cave system. And so if an earthquake happens, Memphis may fall into the Mississippi, but Nashville as a city may literally fall into this massive cave system that we're on top of. And there's all these historic stories of these enslaved individuals that fell into these caves in Nashville and they couldn't find them. And so we're literally I've heard some experts say like there's this cave underneath Nashville that's like 6 times the size of Bridgestone Arena.
It's unreal.
And no one talks about it.
Right. Well, and it's hard to talk about it because we
can't see. What
do we know?
Exactly.
I mean, we know so little of what's underground that it'll blow your mind. But that's one of the coolest things I'm really passionate about indigenous history and archaeology here in the state. And if you look at the belief systems and the culture and the art that was left behind and the people that are still here today, indigenous history is not just history. These people are still here. The other world, the underworld, the karst, the below, is such a big part of not only their belief systems, but their daily lives.
Well, there's all these stories of these underground cities throughout America.
Because you could just be walking through the forest that you lived in and fall into a pit and never come back.
And then you're in an underground city,
right?
Surrounded by 10,000
And if
people.
you do come back, if you are that guy that was like, I actually climbed out of this mess, you come back with this insane story that no one ever believes until you bring, like Devil's Step Hollow, that's in Justin P. Wilson, is one of the coolest places on the planet.
That place is so cool.
And the artwork that you'll see in there, and not just that, but the stains that have been left by the torches that they were lighting up the ceiling of this 100-foot tall cavern that you had to crawl to get into, making it look like the night sky on the inside. It's all of it's so incredible. And that's such a huge part of Tennessee history that we're very disconnected from, like you were saying. Yeah. One of my other favorite examples of how much that impacts modern Nashville, but most people don't know it, is the saber-toothed cats that we used to have here. And the reason that we have the Nashville Predators. Yeah. And the reason that a saber-toothed tiger, it feels so random for a mascot in Nashville, but it's not at all. One of our main banks downtown is built on top of the cave where they were building this bank. The guys go down there 30 feet down, and there's a full saber-toothed skull and a bunch of bones from a saber-toothed cat, and then piles of bones that this particular cat had been pulling all of its prey into this cave, eating them, leaving the rest to rot. 10,000 years later, we find it building a bank in Nashville. We're like, oh, that's cool. We can name a hockey team after it.
Yeah. And that's crazy. They take the skull and put it in the Bridgestone Arena.
Yeah. And now you can see it in the Bridgestone Arena.
So how cool is that? With Middle Tennessee in mind, what a lot of people also don't know is that there's 200 waterfalls within 2 hours of Nashville. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the water systems with the waterfalls. And then also just south of Nashville, you have the Duck River, one of the most biodiverse rivers in the world. What is it? 400 species of birds live on the banks of that river. And I think it's like 300 species of fish live within that river. So let's talk about the waterfalls. We'll get into the river, and then we're going to talk about more wildlife.
Yeah.
And then East Tennessee. We can't forget
East Tennessee. But you were saying earlier, why should people come here? Everything that you just said is such a perfect example. Whenever I show someone a video that I've shot or a photo of Burgess Falls, which is an hour outside of downtown Nashville, that's one of the most beautiful waterfalls on the planet.
That's stunning.
And it's just hanging out. It's like being in Jurassic Park. It's in this giant cavern. Going down, you have to paddle to the bottom now. I still remember being able to walk down the Jurassic Park-like cage at the side, which a flood removed. I think it's been a decade now, but being even at the top, or if you kayak to the bottom, that's one of the coolest places in the world. Just our state parks alone in Middle Tennessee that are based around waterfalls. I always tell people, like, there's a golden circle here that you could come and do. Plan a week to camp or glamp or whatever you want to do, stay in hotels, and you can drive around an hour, sometimes 5 minutes in between these waterfalls.
So, and I don't know if you saw our waterfall video. It was one of the first videos we came out with.
Was it
6 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
We were stupid enough to film 11 of those 14 waterfalls in that video in a 1 day period.
Oh yeah.
We started at like 3:30 in the morning, hiked into Virgin Falls, got lost because the signs were down, hiked an additional 3 miles until we found the trail again.
Yeehaw.
And we filmed almost all of that in 1 day. We stopped at like 10 p.m.
See, it's doable.
It's doable.
You're insane.
I would not recommend it to anybody.
I would say a week is what I would tell people.
But a week is a really good period to see all of those waterfalls. I've taken some clients from around the world to these waterfalls. I would recommend maybe like 4 or 5 in 1 day.
Sure, yeah.
11 is a lot.
That's a tremendous amount. I mean, hey man, you did it.
We did it, yes.
And now you can say you
and
did
I
it.
said I did it. Yeah.
And now you'll never do it again.
I probably will do it again. Let's be honest. I'm that insane. I'm probably going to do it again. Okay, so let's talk about the Duck River, and we'll get into East Tennessee from there.
Yeah, and we were mentioning Billy and the administration earlier. A lot of optics and a lot of communications around the Duck River right now, just because it is one of the most important rivers on the planet from a biodiversity and from a living quality, not just for wildlife, but for us standpoint.
Well, all of what everything south of Spring Hill, basically to the Alabama line, get their drinking water from the Duck River, if I remember correctly.
Yep. And that's just goes straight back to what we were talking about earlier, and I won't get on that tangent, but there is no separation between us and nature. Yeah. I mean, we have to take care of ourselves, and to do that, we have to take care of nature. And the Duck River is such a prime example of that. The mussels and all these other organisms that people don't even really know exist that are in the Duck River that don't exist anywhere else on the planet. It's so weird to think about. In 10 years, we could wipe them out and they would never come back. And it would be the same situation as well, like the work that Colossal's doing to bring back the woolly mammoth and the thylacine and the dodo and this other stuff that was, has been extinct from like 200 to 400 to 10,000 years. We're looking at that happening every day right now. We're looking at wiping out species completely that have been here for millions of years longer than humanity. And it's just really humbling to me to think about that, just to think that you can go to a river and outside of Nashville and put some goggles on and duck your head in a river and look at a bunch of things that don't exist anywhere else on the planet except for that one waterway. And that's thousands of different things. It's not just like a handful of species. Like we're working with the Tennessee Aquarium right now for a species called the laurel dace, which is this adorable little fish, like a minnow, like this long, but it's the exact colors of your shirt. Love that shirt, by the way.
Interesting.
So it's really bright and beautiful.
Oh, I
think it only exists above waterfalls around Walden's Ridge in like one pocket of Tennessee.
Have they been towards Henry Horton State Park?
For what specifically?
That fish.
No, because it only exists in one small pocket of Tennessee.
Okay.
And they, like with the floods and everything that came through their conservation institute at the aquarium, if they hadn't gone out there and scooped up these guys, they would have been gone forever. Okay. And like the Tennessee sturgeon is another really cool example of fish species that's been around for hundreds of millions of years. They literally look like dinosaurs swimming. We've almost wiped out, and they're on the rebound from conservation efforts, which I think is really great. And that's just the Duck River, and that's when you start looking at all the Wolf River, even the Tennessee River, everything, all of our waterways here. We have so much water in Tennessee.
We take that for granted.
We really take it for granted.
Yep.
And you can
the interesting thing though about Tennessee is the lakes. There's only one lake that was naturally made. Mm-hmm. That's Reelfoot Lake. Mm-hmm. All the other lakes have been man-made. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very interesting dynamic that we have in the state.
Yeah. And that's why if you go paddling a bunch of those lakes, you see, silos and a bunch of other things sticking out like Percy Priest. There's towns underneath Percy Priest and all that fun stuff. Yeah. It's very interesting. We're definitely a river and a wetland state. We're not a lake state for sure. It doesn't feel that way now that we've got so many lakes surrounding us now. Like growing up in East Tennessee, in between Knoxville and Maryville, there's just, everything feels like there's a lake on every street that you're on. We
just did that drive a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Everybody has a boat. Yep. Like we always grew up with kayaks, canoes, and everybody else has, jet skis or speedboats and all that stuff. And it's just such a huge part of the culture over there.
So let's talk about East Tennessee. What are some of your favorite gems to go explore in East Tennessee?
Oh man, I talk a lot about the Great Smoky Mountains just because that's such an incredible place. But we're all very familiar with that park, and there's so much more in East Tennessee.
There's Frozen Head. There's Memorial
Tellico. There's so many other places that don't get the recognition. One of my favorites is I just did a long shoot at North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area, which if you go out to Knoxville and you just drive an hour north. Yeah. That's where our only free-roaming wild elk are in Tennessee now, which we used to have elk all across the state until I say we, but 200 years ago, they got wiped out because they were easy hunting. They taste great, look great, all that fun stuff. So if you go up to North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area, which you can go up there, you can go mudding, you can go camping, you can go hunting, anything you want to do. That's where our elk are now. And there's elk in Great Smoky Mountains, but they're only on the North Carolina side. We also have elk in Land Between the Lakes, but they're contained in the prairie, and it's a breeding program, and they're not wild. Yep. You want to see wild elk in Tennessee? North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area in East Tennessee is the only place you can do it. You can go hunt them there. And it's an incredible, incredible place.
What's the hunting season for them?
Oh, I'm not sure because I'm not a hunting guy, but it's all available on their site. Hunting is part of conservation, but it's just not something. It's a tremendously important part of conservation, but it's not something that I'm directly involved in. Okay. And man, I've got my hats in so many arenas that I have to
change your hats for every different thing that you're doing.
Listen, we got to be authentic, Stuart. We got to be authentic. I probably, speaking of, have hay.
I don't see it. I only see
hair. Good. Yeah. Well, then I must have shaken it off before I came in here. But the coolest thing about that trip was I was up there, if you're going to do these shoots, sunrise and sunset are the best times to do it visually, but that's also when these animals are most active. Yeah. Got a lot of crepuscular and diurnal megafauna, and the elk are like that, and that means that they're active either during in the day or sunrise and sunset. So I'm driving up in the pitch black, driving up this mountain to get up there and film these elk at sunrise. And as soon as I park the car, and as soon as the first light comes over the mountains, you start hearing elk bugling.
Oh, that's cool.
Back and forth.
That's cool.
And I was there when they're
like how many wild elk are there?
Somewhere around 2,000 right now, I believe. And
I had an experience like that in Colorado. It was not elk.
It'll blow your mind.
And I was in the deep mountains near Vail, and I took this dirt road. It was middle of the night, same thing, 3 a.m., dirt road. No idea where I was going. And it was this resort. This was September 30th, a couple years ago. October 1st, that entire mountain shuts down because of snow. And literally, we were there September 30th. October 1st, they had 14 inches of snow within an hour. It was like 6 feet of snow within the rest of that day. And I'm like, that's why it shuts down. But we literally arrived at sunrise. The sun was coming over the mountains. There's this beautiful lake, and there's 2 moose. It was one of the best experiences of my life.
Yeah, and that you'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And that is such a good example of the type of thing, like with the elk, that used to exist here in Tennessee, that's been wiped out. And I hate harping on catastrophe and not talking about all the successes that we've had, but the elk is a success that we've had. And that's the reason that, this is something that we associate with Nashville and cattle culture and country music, Western music and everything, is because that all started here because the Western frontier was this part of the country first.
Yes.
Before we started moving out that way. And when that was happening, we still had bison here. Mm-hmm. We still had
there's stories from Timothy the Mumbrian that there's over 500,000 bison in the French Lick of downtown Nashville.
Yeah, exactly. So all those experiences that we have to go out west to have, our ancestors were having here 150 years ago. Yeah. We're not talking about 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
With elk specifically, we're talking about 100 years ago. And that, to me, it just really puts things in perspective at how quickly things can change. And how long it takes to return things to what they used to be after that, blink of an eye, you remove a species, they don't come back. The elk didn't come back to North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area or East Tennessee until we tranquilized them and transported them and brought them over.
Yeah.
And that's crazy to me.
So
such an interesting thing to think about.
Let's get into wildlife. Nashville had its first black bear sighting in 100 years, probably a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, black bears in middle Tennessee. They're all worried. I literally grew up in upstate New York. Black bears were a common thing I saw every single day. There was an experience. My dad and I were going to go out and get chicken wings one night, and there was literally a black bear climbing to get on my roof. I opened the door and I saw the crotch of the black bear. And then I closed the door and I said, we're not getting chicken wings for an hour. Let's
correct response.
Yeah. Let's let this bear take care of its thing. I'll go get the wings later. But what's that like from a communication standpoint?
Oh, man.
People are like, okay, so they're migrating. The bears are migrating from East Tennessee over into here. There's been reports of black panthers. I've actually seen a black panther in Middle Tennessee. This was years ago. That they're coming up from Florida. There's rumors of alligators in West Tennessee. There's also alligators in East Tennessee, but we could talk about that. And then this is a thing that you may have saw in our account. I saw 2 wild bobcats that were mating in a Nashville park, and I have hiked hundreds and hundreds of miles, and I have not seen bobcats in the wild in a long time.
Yeah,
here I've seen it in other parts of the country, and everyone's like, "Oh, I see bobcats every single day of my life," and I'm like, probably not,
probably not.
And you don't see the rarity of seeing 2 of them together. It's very rare.
Yeah, that's very.
And so let's talk about the bobcats. I don't know if you saw that video that went viral of ours. You live on a farm in north of Nashville, and how often are you seeing bobcats?
I've never seen one up there. See red foxes, coyotes, possums, raccoons.
That's why I see in my yard every Sunday.
I've never seen one in the Smokies either, and I've done tracking. I see their prints, I see their scat and stuff a lot.
Yeah,
but no, to say that you would see a bobcat every day in Tennessee,
I think you're crazy.
The only way that that's happening is if you have a breeding mom that's established a den on your property, and then maybe you are seeing them every day, and that's really cool. But gosh, man, you talked about black bears, you talked about a bunch of other stuff in there, and that's such a good question. And with the black bears specifically, that has been one of the things that I've been really involved in and very interested in.
Yeah, if you go to your account, so make sure that you're following him. You have a couple black bear videos on your LinkedIn.
The first sighting in Davidson County in over 100 years happened in 2018. That was up in Jolton.
Yep.
And that's right. I still live in Davidson County, so I'm in Nashville proper, but I'm in the Davidson County part of Goodlettsville, and that's all the Highland Rim Forest up there.
Yeah, which is one of the most beautiful areas of Middle Tennessee.
Beautiful. And it's a great spot for black bears because we have old growth trees, enough highway system from a nature standpoint, and I'm talking about wildlife pathways, not our actual highways where they could move through. So that was the first bear. It caught on a trail camera, so 100%, confirmed everything else. TWRA, everyone was like, yeah, okay, there's a black bear here. It was in 2018. We didn't see another one until 2023. And during that summer of 2023, it was crazy.
Because he did like a 40-mile loop.
In 2023, there was multiple black bears. Yeah. I think at least 12, which is a significant amount for Middle Tennessee. And we're talking from like April to October. They were in Middle Tennessee,
but like wandering Spring Hill all the way up to
Franklin,
Hendersonville,
all the way up Clarksville, Hendersonville, everywhere. And in downtown Nashville too, in downtown Nashville proper, there were black bears walking around and knocking people's trash cans.
That's amazing.
Over. So cool. And it hasn't happened.
I remember all the news outlets were doing like these bear tracking maps. They're like, these are the bears. Yeah. Like everyone's making such a big deal of, which is fine. Like it's cool.
It's fun,
but like
it gets people engaged and it gets you excited. But the media tends to try and make you afraid by overhyping it. Please be, and I've done a lot of bear safety awareness stuff on my account, but it's not, the stakes aren't do this or die. It's just know what you're doing. And if you're trying to get chicken wings with your dad, you see a bear, shut the door instead of walking up to the bear.
Be loud around black bears. They're more timid of you than you are of them.
Right. They're basically
there was another situation. Have you been to Western Pennsylvania?
I have, yeah.
That's a beautiful area of the country. The Pennsylvania Grand Canyon's out there, these deep valleys and mountains. I was in the back country of Western Pennsylvania. Like the closest Dollar General was maybe an hour.
That's how you know
you're in the back country. And I was on this dirt road, and it was the biggest bear. It was a brown bear. And it was the biggest bear I ever seen. I don't know if it was a Kodiak or if it was definitely not a grizzly because they're not in Pennsylvania. I was driving a Subaru Legacy at that time. This was years and years ago. This bear was almost 3 times the size of my car. It was massive. Him and I, literally, he sat in the middle of the road. We stared at each other for 15 minutes. I'm like, I'm not, you could destroy me. You could destroy my car. And we just stared at each other, and then he just walked away. But like that was my most dangerous bear encounter that I've ever had.
Yeah, there are brown black bears, you know, and we don't have actual brown or grizzly bears on the eastern coast, but you can see some very big bears
brown
because it would be a black bear that has either a cinnamon phase coat or, we have blonde black bears.
That bear was huge. I wish.
And they get big.
Yeah, and this is before smartphones were a thing. Like I wish I had like a camera.
There are 800-pound black bears walking around Appalachia. They're massive. And the typical grizzly that you would see in Yellowstone or somewhere else is going to weigh 300 to 400 pounds.
Okay.
The big ones, you can have a 900 to a 1,200 pound grizzly bear, but those are the exceptions. And
would that be more Alaska based then, probably?
Well, and that's a whole different topic, but yes, because there's brown bears and there's grizzly bears. It's all the same species.
Yep.
They're all technically brown bears, but the differentiation between the two and grizzly bears are larger as they're inland, and brown bears actually have access to coastal resources. Okay. So when you do like Fat Bear Week and the massive bears that you see up in like Katmai Park in Alaska, the national park, those are brown bears because they have those coastal resources and they're eating salmon and they get to those huge proportions, but they're just doing it as part of what's called hyperphagia to feed before they go into an actual hibernation. Of course. Yeah. So they're just getting huge. The grizzly bears, on the other hand, don't have all those resources. They're inland. They're in places like Yellowstone National Park. So they're all having to grow to these sizes year round and become big and bad and beat the other fellow into submission so they can actually have access to their limited resources. Yep. So the grizzly bears there are much larger than the typical brown bears you'd see on the coast and stuff like that. Just to sidetrack into something I find completely fascinating.
So, 2023, that's the last like bear sighting of Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
There was a report of an alligator in West Tennessee. And most likely it was somebody that owned, maybe, I don't know, that owned the alligator and released it into the wild. That's the story that's coming out of East Tennessee with the alligators there, correct?
Yes, and it's two very different scenarios that are very interesting. The West Tennessee alligators are in West Tennessee, period.
Of course.
And they are coming up
and they're
waterways naturally.
But they're not big boy alligators.
So you're never going to see a 12 to a 15-foot alligator because we don't have the ecosystem to sustain breeding populations and let them live the long lives that it takes, because alligators can live 100 to 200 years and they never stop growing. East Tennessee, the ones that you're finding like in the Appalachian Mountains where there's no physical way that an alligator could get there, that's some idiot dropping off an alligator that they had as a pet that got too big. And they were like, oh my God, this thing's 4 feet long. I'm going to go dump it in a pond. And then some kid's going to find it, like what's happened, and, is out there fishing and he pulls a 4-foot alligator out of a lake.
Imagine being that kid and you're like, I caught an alligator.
Right? Why? I would stop. I'd never fish again. Like that's your story. You're never going to top that. Like, you've hit it, man. You just fished an alligator in the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah. So that's completely different than what we're seeing out in West Tennessee, where there's so many waterways and wetlands. Like we were talking about earlier, the state lines, nature doesn't stop at state lines. All of these alligators are coming up naturally because it's so much warmer throughout our winters for most of the time that these alligators are coming up the Mississippi. They're coming up the tributaries. They're coming up the non-dammed parts of the Tennessee River, which is a big reason of why we don't have any alligators in Middle Tennessee right now. It's not because they can't be here. It's because we have so many dams that they can't really get past. It's not the case out in West Tennessee. So they're coming up naturally. There was a 9-foot alligator that was found last year out in West Tennessee, right off the Wolf River, like 2 days after we had left an excursion with the Wolf River Conservancy. And he's just hanging out by a stop sign and 100 people are filming him, and he's 9 feet long and he's just chilling in a drainage ditch. And an alligator that large it's highly unlikely that somebody was holding on to him until he reached that size, because when they're 9 feet long, the PSI of their bite and the things they can do with their tail, you wouldn't be able to contain them inside a house.
Of course.
Because the walls of things that we build, even cinder block, is nothing to them.
Yeah.
So that guy made his way up here by himself. And that was one of multiple sightings that year in West Tennessee. It'll be really interesting when it gets warm again to see what we see this year. And we tend to think, well, these large reptiles can't survive our winters up here. But just like frogs and everything else, alligators actually go into what's called brumation, which is a form of hibernation where they'll pick a spot that's nice and cozy under the water, wait for everything to freeze over the top, and they'll stick just their nostrils on their nose tip up out of the water, and everything will freeze around it except for that. So they're taking in and they're breathing oxygen that entire time while they're an ice cube. But they've got their nostrils out and they just breathe through the winter and wait it out and hibernate. And then when things thaw, they just go back at it.
They're probably really hungry.
Very hungry. Yeah, I would imagine so. That doesn't sound like my plan for the winter, but yeah, it's really cool to think that's entirely possible. They're doing it in Texas because, I mean, if you've been to Texas, it gets really freaking cold in Texas and things freeze in Texas and it snows, and alligators have been in Texas for millennia and they've been surviving this way for a long time. Now, are they going to come up here and start breeding like crazy?
Probably not.
No, because that's not sustainable in that environment, in that ecosystem. You can't have babies freezing into popsicles and then expecting them all to survive. So will we have natural alligators up here? Yes, we do, and we have for a long time. This is a fact. We have alligators in Tennessee. Are they going to start breeding and become something that we need to worry about? Not until we stop getting frosts during the winter. If we do it all.
I think the bigger concern, we were in Townsend the other day, and I saw my first wild boar in Cades Cove. And I've been in Cades Cove quite a few times. First wild boar I've ever seen in Tennessee. I've heard stories, I've heard rumors, but we were talking to the people at the visitor center, and she said that the wild boar population, or no, it was at the company distilling, the wild boar population has increased 13% year over year over the last 5 years. And I was like, okay, so 5 years ago, but they were doing these hunts at Black Mary Farms for wild boars, and I had no idea this was a thing. I'm like, I want to go hunt a wild boar in East Tennessee. It sounds fun. But I think a bigger concern is what the wild boars are doing to farmland in Texas and in Arkansas and Oklahoma, and now they're migrating over to this side too. So when was the last time you saw a wild boar in Tennessee?
I saw the first one as an adult last year in the park in Great Smoky Mountains. in person. I see photographs. People send me photos of them.
Yeah, I'll show you the one that we saw. He was a big he was like this. I'm like, somebody's like, hey, you want $20 to go? I'm like, that's going to be good eating, man. Like, that's that pig. Wild boar is truly one of my favorite meats.
And if you want to go hunt something, please kill some wild boars. Yeah, knock yourself out. But yeah, I saw them as kids too, and they terrified me because they're very aggressive. But I spent a long time without seeing one in the park, and their numbers are on the rise again.
Where in the park did you see it?
Park. I saw mine in Cades Cove.
That's where we saw ours.
Yeah, and that's because, and that's a whole nother topic to get into, but that's the only savanna grassland that really exists there now. It's all old growth forest, and that's what most of that area used to be.
Yep.
And that's, the boars love that, the bears love it, the deer love it. That's why you see so much wildlife in Cades Cove, is because they still have an ecosystem where they can thrive. And the bears are having to fight these boars for all their resources. These animals are the same size. And
have you seen them
omnivores
fight?
And they're eating the same thing. Did you see the video of them fighting?
No.
Recently that came out of the park. That
was at Cades Cove.
Yeah. Well, it was adjacent. I'm not sure what road it's on. Okay. Right by a road in the Smokies. And this like probably 400-pound bear grabbing a wild boar of the same size and pulling him up the mountainside by his neck.
Oh, wild.
I'll send it to you.
I would love to see that. You need
to see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all the stuff you're talking about in Texas with agricultural land and everything else, that's all happening here too. We're just not talking about it because it's something that is really, really hard to wrangle in, because these things breed like crazy. You know, they can have, I forget what the terminology is, but they can have up to 20 babies in like 2-year period. Yeah. But and they don't just mate once a year either. And so they're just pumping out babies. And by juxtaposition, a black bear can have babies every 2 years, and she's having 1 to 5 cubs max, typically 1 or 2 or 3. And typically only 2 of those or 1 of those will survive. So you've got 2 animals that are omnivores having, fighting for the same resources in the same ecosystem that are the same size. And that's only just one of the reasons why the black bears are kind of having to find new pockets to exist because of these wild boars. And I was out looking at the traps and stuff with the Tremont Institute this past fall. And things are on pause right now with the wild boars in the park and the hunting for reasons I can't talk about, unfortunately. It's also not my place to talk about it. But there are people that exist for the state and for the parks, and not just Tennessee, that their sole purpose is to hunt and remove these hogs.
Of course.
That's how big of a problem they are.
Yeah. Hog comes through. Outsource that to some Nashville restaurants. We can have some good times.
Right. They taste so good. And it's finding them that's hard. It's not the lack of the animals, or not that people don't want them to be hunted. It's just not a very easy animal to go out and find and kill. And you'd think it would be, because it's a giant pig.
Well, so the other day I was at, not the other day, Joe, you remember this. This was a couple months ago. And we were walking out towards Long Hunter State Park, and not the main lake area, that little small lake, that 2-mile trail. And I swore in the distance I saw something black. And I'm like, and it was about maybe 3.5 feet, 4 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And it was in the high growth grass near the lake. And I'm like, that's either a black bear or it's a wild boar. And I just saw it for a second. So I'm like, keeping my eyes out, I'm like, okay, I may get attacked by some type of black animal very soon.
Right.
But I think they're probably here in Middle Tennessee too.
I think you would not be wrong to say that.
Yeah.
And the one thing
especially out towards that area, Couchville.
For sure.
Yeah.
If you're below Interstate 40, which just really cuts the entire ecosystem of Tennessee in half, which a boar is not going to be able to cross without getting hit by a car. Most instances. Yeah. It's the same for black bears. The hogs are such a huge problem, man. And they root up agricultural land, just like you're saying, but they're also doing that to wetlands. They're doing it to the really unique ecosystems that we have in the Smokies. You can always tell where a boar's been and not a bear or something else by the way that they root up the ground. Yep. And I mean, it looks like somebody came through with a shovel and just...
Well, that's why for truffles in Italy, they use pigs because they can root up the truffles on a certain thing.
And they eat everything, man. Yep. Salamanders, frogs, rabbits, vegetation, everything. I mean, a wild hog will eat anything it can get its hands on. So that means they can live anywhere and then produce like crazy and then take over an ecosystem and be like, hey, thanks for all the food. This is great. Yeah. I think we'll stay here for another 200 years.
Yeah, 200 years. What's your favorite state park that you like to take people to?
Ooh, that's a great question. Old Stone Fort State Archaeological Park.
Yep.
is one of the most fascinating places in the Southeast, let alone Tennessee, just because
and it's only 60 minutes from Nashville.
If that. Yeah. Without traffic, you can get there in less than an hour. You're looking at a Mississippian era indigenous fort that was built 1,400 years ago, we think, maybe 900, was in use for 500 years, which is, twice as long as the U.S. has been around. And you can still see the earthworks. You can still see what's left of this. It's not technically a fort. That's a misnomer that was given to it when we got over here. I say we, as in Europeans. Not we specifically.
Because the British, before the Revolutionary War, surveyed this land and they found that.
Yes, they did.
1700s.
You're exactly right. Yeah. And they were like, this is so wildly impressive. This has to be a fort from some long lost civilization. But also the really interesting thing about when people from Europe came over and started colonizing this area, the indigenous folks in Middle Tennessee and around Nashville specifically had already long abandoned this area. Yep. Of course, there were still indigenous people moving through. And then
but most of the tribes, and I tell this to people, most of the tribes lived 30 or 40 miles away from where Nashville was actually founded.
Sure. And Nashville itself at one point was a very large indigenous civilization, but it was hundreds of years before.
But this was also the prime hunting ground for Chickasaw, Cherokee.
You're exactly right. And that just means you're passing through, but places like Old Stone Fort were gathering places for all of these people.
And there's stories of others. Iroquois from New York coming down for the solar eclipse to Old Stone.
Yes. Which is, how cool is that? And that place is still there and you can still do that. And the reason that I would say that's the park that I would bring people to is because that's not all you have. And if you're not really interested in human history, okay, cool. A bunch of piles of earth aren't really going to mean much to you. But the waterfalls and the cliffs that surround it, gorgeous. You want to swim, you want to see waterfalls, you want to see beautiful wildlife. You just want to feel like you're literally out in the middle of nowhere. That park has literally all of those things. And it's very walkable.
And it's a very small scale park. It's I think 800 acres.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more.
And you can walk the entire perimeter of the fort on the top of the cliffs, or you can climb down the cliffs, get in the waterfalls, do whatever you want. It's got something for everyone and it's beautiful. And that's why I would say, one of the ones that's at the top of my list personally. What is your favorite state park? I'm very curious because you're spending a lot of time in our state parks.
I'm a big sucker for Radnor Lake because of proximity.
Mm-hmm.
I have hiked at Radnor Lake probably 300 and sometimes. The Granger Range and all of that down there. But that's a proximity play. Natchez Trace State Park is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
200,000 acres of forestry and the off-roading capabilities there. Frozen Head. I like Frozen Head a lot because of where just the history of that area with the Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary being on the backside of it. And it's so Dunbar State Park, Dunbar Cave State Park up in Clarksville.
What a cool place.
Such a cool place.
The only place that you can go, by the way, as a public and see some of these indigenous petroglyphs and everything that we're talking about on a cave tour. You can just go in there with the rangers.
And just the history of how that turned into an entertainment cave.
Right. People are just dancing and hanging out
in a cave. And
such a weird
there's a wedding destination now out towards Clarksville. They've converted an entire cave to this wedding destination thing. And that's just it's a very unique Tennessee experience that you can't really get anywhere else.
It really is.
Bloodsoe. Bloodsoe is really it's hard. Burgess Falls is fantastic. Virgin Falls area, I know that's becoming a state park, but we were just in Lost Creek Cave a couple months ago, and we did the cave. We saw the cave waterfall in there, and that was a super unique experience. And all of those experiences are different. It's caves, it's mountains, it's waterfalls, it's flatlands, it's
and like you were saying earlier, you can literally see all of that in one day if you want to.
Yes,
which is wild.
Absolutely. And I've done this. I have been on top of a mountain 2,000 feet in a day, towards Black Mountain, and then I've gone underground, and I was underground 200 feet in a cave, all in one day.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre that you can start on top of a mountain and then end up under the mountain.
Yeah.
There's not many places in the United States you can do that.
And especially that accessible.
Yes.
I think is a really important part.
But like if you go over like
the
caverns, for example, towards Fall Creek Falls and McMinnville, you literally are 200 feet, maybe 100 feet under the peak of a mountain. And then you go into this massive, like beautiful cavern. Like, yeah. And then so like that day, like when I go out to the caverns, I'm on top of the mountain and then you go underneath and you're like, wow, I'm literally 2,000 feet in the air, but under 100 feet of rock.
Right.
How does this make sense?
And bizarre is the exact word for that, but in a good sense. Like,
yeah.
It'll blow your mind if you let it, if you want it to.
Yeah.
If that's the type of thing you want to experience. Oh man, Tennessee
and I don't
packed with it.
Maybe Wyoming, maybe
Sure.
a couple those other states, maybe some Colorado has those type of opportunities.
But again, how accessible is it? How long does it take to get there?
Yeah.
How are you would have to plan an entire day around one spot instead of, 5 or 6. It's that I think is such a huge draw of outdoor recreation in Tennessee is how accessible our outdoor recreation is, which is really, really fantastic.
So I want to say this, and I don't know if I necessarily have a question yet. So I view things from the Christian worldview. I believe in a young earth theory. And that's just based on not the evidence that I see, but like my interpretation of the world. And I think all of these things, these caves and all of these things could be formed in this young earth theory. So when you're talking to people, how can you interpret on the storytelling, like people that are believing in that theory? And it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the earth is millions of years old or if it's young. We need to live our lives. We need to take care of each other. We need to take care of the earth that the Lord has given us. And from a storytelling perspective, with the content you're creating, where's your mindset in those things, if you don't mind me asking? No,
not at all. I'm not a young earth person. I'm big on natural history, and I've seen a lot of things that are very, very old. But I've also seen a lot of things that don't make sense at all. We all have. And I think the most important thing that we can do in communication is bring people together and not pull them apart.
Yeah.
You and I can sit at this table and have this exact conversation in a constructive manner because there's respect involved and there's a benefit to this and there's a desire to learn and understand. And that is the most important thing in communication.
And I think and I think we both love the state of Tennessee.
Of course.
Yeah.
And to me, I would never sit down and be like, Stuart, that's ludicrous. And I don't think that. And I would never say it, A, because that's not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah.
But B, who the hell am I to tell you that that's ludicrous? There are so many things that we don't understand about our planet, about how nature functions, about how everything came into existence. If you want to get really philosophical, we can. I'm a very spiritual fella. I don't really belong to any organized religion, but I am extremely spiritual from a sense of nature and consciousness and how everything in this world is connected. And I think it would be so foolish for me or anyone else to sit down at this table and say, you're wrong. What you've seen and what you believe is incorrect. Let me tell you what is correct. And I do have scientific things that we can talk about. You have scientific things that we can talk about.
Where my belief, I think, ultimately stems from is the genealogical aspect of the Bible and how these theologians and these people have studied dates of humans and how Adam was alive possibly when the flood happened. That could be a realistic possibility. Or it's 2,000 years later. So mine's based on the genealogical approach of the Bible, not evidence of rocks and stuff like that, but more of the age of humanity. I think that's where I have my interpretation.
Sure. And I think that if you use that belief system in a constructive manner to make yourself a better person and leave this earth a better place than you found it, which you guys are through a lot of the work that you're doing, that is all that matters, in my opinion. If you do not use that viewpoint to deconstruct other people's well-being, way of life, or take away from other people, which is not what I'm seeing, then that is what belief should be. That's what hope should be. If that is the way that the world speaks to you, good on you, man. Yeah. Most people live the rest of their life and never find anything like that. And you and I have studied a lot of different things. Theology, I feel like, is something that you probably know a whole lot more about than I do, because I'm not really involved.
That's my degree.
Exactly. There you go. So correct. That is not a world that I live in. So I would never be able to sit at this table and be on the same level as you in that conversation. And I think that that's something that a lot of us need to remind ourselves of, is to be humble and always be in a position of learning from someone else instead of cutting down or, walls. Just, I find myself doing this all the time because it feels like,
and especially
so many things
with the work that you guys are doing, there's so much. I'm coming from a conservation standpoint because God told me to have dominion over this earth. So I want to conserve this earth because I have that authority from God to do that. I grew up in farming. I understand personally. I think I understand a little bit more of government overreach in farming and in these things than a lot of people. And I love parks. I love hiking. I love getting outdoors. And so I want to conserve it for my son and for his sons and for their sons. And so I'm coming from that perspective. And I know there's a lot of different worldviews and beliefs on what conservation is. But I've learned something from this conversation.
Yeah. And you're stewarding, you're caretaking.
Yeah.
And that to me is what I hear when you say that. You're not saying this land belongs to me.
No, it's God's.
You're saying I am here as a steward. Yeah. I am here as a conserver. I am here to take care of this incredible gem of a place that we've somehow popped up on. This is where we exist, on this floating rock that has DNA and RNA.
That's the
and mitochondria.
It's from the sun, so we're not boiling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what are the frickin' odds that all of that happened and led to you and me sitting here and having this conversation? Doesn't belong to us. And we're just here to leave it better than we found it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, and we're coming from two completely different points, but focusing on that commonality is what's so important. And that's what we need right now and every day. And that's
how, all right. I said we're avoiding politics. We're getting into it. And this will be basically the last closing question. How can people that disagree come together for the common good of our country and of protecting? Theodore Roosevelt was very significant to our country. He protected a lot of land. Most of that land would have been resorts and things, which I'm a capitalist. Like, I love that, but there also has to be this give and take. Mm-hmm. So how can people, especially under this new administration, like, how can people on different sides of the aisle come together, have a handshake agreement? Let's build something better.
You know, it's a twofold question. And the reason is because I wish that didn't have to be labeled as a political question. And I'm not saying that you did. I'm saying that's the mindset we've all been given, you know?
And that's the mindset that we're trained to think.
Exactly.
Yes.
I don't think that's a political question. I think that's a human question. I think that's a philosophical a question of the heart and of the mind and of existence.
And at the end of the day, I love breaking bread with anybody.
You've got to.
That's the most important thing for me.
So the talk on hope that I was mentioning that I just gave last week is called The Naturalist's Hope. And that is my whole, if I can just focus on that for the rest of my career, and that's the legacy I leave behind, it's not new. Telling people that hope wins is not a new thing. I'm not the first person to do it. But if I can remind the people, the politicians, the stewards that I'm working with on a daily basis and that are listening in these conferences, if all I do is remind them of, hey, hope is here. This is scientifically proven to be the most powerful tool that we have, coming together, focusing on what we share and what is hopeful over catastrophe and anything else that comes along with it. Even if I just remind them that, dude, mission complete to me. Like, it is so important to me that we focus on doing better and how we can take those steps together to do better. And you accomplish that through hope. And I think when it comes to the administration and everything that we're dealing with right now, in the nonprofit conservation sector, we have to remain apolitical not because we're saying, hey, we're better than this, we're above it, but because we want and have to work with everyone. It's not that we have to, it's the first part that we want to. Nothing is accomplished through throwing up walls and saying, I'm not working with these people. Yep. They don't believe or say the same things that I do. We have to be a greeting and a middle point where people can say, this is what we want to accomplish. We all have these shared beliefs in conservation and stewardship. We all want to leave this world a better place. How do we do that? Do I agree with everything that Governor Bill Lee has done his entire administration? Of course not. Does Governor Bill Lee as a person agree with everything that I've done throughout my entire life? Of course not. I've made a ton of mistakes. We're not the same person, but we have so many shared values that if I take the time, and if anyone takes the time to focus on those shared values instead of what is different, the amount that we're able to accomplish is insane. There's 4 new state parks coming up that TennGreen has had a direct hand in making a reality.
Can we reveal where they are?
Not yet. But one of them, just the West Tennessee Park, is at Middle Fork Bottoms. That was
I saw the announcement.
So that's the one of the. There's 3 more
that's,
coming.
A little bit north of Jackson,
right? Just have me back on, and we'll talk about them as they come up. I'll be very, very excited to let people in on.
Well, when they announced that Savage Golf was becoming a park and it's separate from South Cumberland, we were one of the first ones to make a video about that. Mm-hmm. We drove down there to make a video. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful area of the country.
Yeah, and that to me, as a young man, I never would have saw myself having the opportunity to know Governor Lee's team or work with any of them. Or B, I would have been like, maybe I'll use it to say this, this, and this, and talk about all the other things that people can't stand. But if I just set myself and that hubris and all of that aside and look at the fact that Lee's administration has done more for our state parks and more for conservation
in the last 30 years
it's unreal.
Of governors.
And people will,
last 60 years of
people
governors.
might be mad at me for saying, how could you ignore everything else and focus on that? I've got maybe 75 years on this planet at most, more, hopefully if I take care of myself, but that is such a short amount of time for me to sit and nitpick and be upset about the things that I can't change instead of being actionable about the things that I can make a difference with, that I can change. And that is so much more of a better use of my time to me than the opposite. And that's just, there's no other way to say it. I mean, that is what I'm here to do, is to help and make change. And sometimes you just have to work through the difficult to get to the good.
Well, that's a great way to end a podcast. Jon, where can people learn about what you're doing on the naturalist side? And then I know that's separate outside of TennGreen, but it's interconnected. Oh, we also haven't talked about Hike-a-thon.
Yeah.
So what's Hike-a-thon? And then we'll do the socials.
Oh, man, for sure. I really appreciate you mentioning it, because everything we talked about with state parks, if people are watching this and they're like, wow, that's great, how do I get involved? Hike-a-thon is hands down the best way to get involved. Hike-a-thon is...
And it's hike-a-thon.com. Like
Hike-a-thon, literally, it's just... Yeah. HIKEATHON.com. And what the Hike-a-thon is our largest fundraising event, but you don't have to be in Tennessee to participate. You can participate from anywhere. If you love state parks, you love conservation, you love agriculture, anything that we've been talking about, and you want to get involved, it's an adventure competition where you go out, and you guys did this with us last year and we had such a great time. You hike, bike, kayak, climb, anything that's outdoors and gets you engaged and off of pavement. You log your miles, and you can get other people that are passionate about nature or just passionate about you as a person to donate. And those donations go directly to Tennessee Conservation. And so you can win prizes for the most money donated, the most miles hiked, the most miles paddled. There's pop-up prizes where you don't have to worry about money and hiking a ton of miles. You can win things no matter what. And it's a really great way to get people out in nature and experiencing Tennessee nature or nature. We had people playing in South Korea last year.
That's awesome.
And in England and on the Irish coast.
Yeah.
So cool. In the Caribbean.
That's cool.
You can do this from anywhere, and it's all online. And the goal is to just get you outside and get passionate about nature and then raise funds for conservation. So to register for this, you can register at hikeathon.com, just like you were saying, all through March. And this is every year. We do this every year. And then the competition is held all April long every year. So you got all of March to get prepared, ask us questions. We can help you however you need help. We'd love to help. So reach out to us. And then for all of April, it's on. And the competitions are rolling. People are out. It's so fun to see the photos from all across Tennessee, all across the world, the videos. It's a really good time.
So where can people follow you on social media and learn more about what you're doing? Yeah,
sure. So to follow me on social media, the place that I'm most active, really the only place I'm active, is on Instagram. And that's at Jon B. Dalvey, Jon with no H, because I'm a weirdo. And that is where I'm posting a lot of my videos. That's where you and I have done some work together. That is, Reels to me is my medium. I never did TikTok or anything else, but I do a lot of naturalist content there and work with a lot of other naturalists to really kind of bring Tennessee to the forefront of the conservation conversation.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us here on the Nashville, whatever our podcast is called. It was called Nashville Daily for 5 years, but it's called the XPLR.NASH Podcast. So thank you so much.
Man, Stuart, thanks for having me, brother. It's always great to chat with you. I really appreciate you, man.
Thank you.